the three I's considered esoterically within the ageless wisdom philosophy: instinct, intellect, and intuition. This is one of those triplicities that really quite succinctly encapsulates the experience on the different crosses as we're evolving through many different lifetimes, and gradually, after getting more and more experience on the ordinary wheel incarnating into matter, once we reverse, we're evolving out of materiality and starting to move towards these more intuitive aspects of consciousness, which is so the quality of the soul and seeing from the vision, the third eye, the bull's eye, and mediating Mercury, the fourth ray, with the messages from the soul. When we see the first incarnations into, symbolically, Pisces, the oceans of matter, or in Cancer, mass consciousness, we are first emerging, that the soul is getting deep into matter, and there is a burying oneself into instinctuality. Now, a lot of mass consciousness still is mostly instinctual. Yes, people have minds and they use certain discriminatory faculties. We all have a brain, but most people, or many people at least, are still very much astrally polarized. And it is said that much of the majority of human consciousness is still very much Atlantean in essence. Now, the evolution that the individual makes eventually is moving to intellect, and this is pretty much described very accurately in the Pisces-Virgo axis. If Pisces is that submersion into the mass consciousness, then we polarize into Virgo, where we start developing mental discrimination. As DK in the work says, with trance mediums, you often see Cancer and Pisces in the chart as the prominent, let's say, rising and sun or moon. But for the developing trance medium, we would expect to see some planets in Virgo, where there is a beginning to develop the discriminatory faculty, and starting to work out, okay, but what is this from this? So that development of intellect, and remember that Virgo is exoterically ruled by Mercury, and being in the earth sign, it is very much about this from this, from this, from this, from this. So this is where we start to get a bit more consciously materialistic and concrete, which needs to happen because that allows us to separate out from kind of mass instinctual consciousness, the siren that absorbs and drowns the man, or all the negativity and the victimhood that can come with that blind identification with mass instinctual astral consciousness. So that movement into intellect is where we start to make that discriminatory faculty occur. The final stage is going beyond the intellect, however, which is intuition. And this is where we're talking about the activation of the subtle energy systems within the brain, the receiving in of divine impulses through the mind, and how that starts to inform one's intellectual perception. It's the beyond realms of the mind where that can actually translate into concrete mental thinking. And upon the mutable cross, where we're talking about the evolution out of the personality life, that flickering of the intuition first occurs in Gemini. So we would say symbolically going into Pisces, mass consciousness, into Sagittarius, getting a bit more focused, having a bit more some deliberate goals, moving into Virgo, a bit more discrimination and precision and technicality. And then when we get to Gemini, now there's a beginning to feel the faint flickerings of the intuition, and there we get the duality of the brothers, where we're starting to sense, hold on, here's my personality self, but there's something else. And this is where in Gemini we first start to feel the potentiality, or that little flicker of the other self, and this is where where aspiration starts to emerge. And then there's the reversing of the wheel, and and then eventually there's the death in Pisces, the crucifixion of the personality, and then at that point we can start to have the impressing upon the personality of the fixed cross energies, right? So we're seeing with that circle and the reversal of that circle, the development of these different faculties. So intuition is connected to Mercury. Mercury is a fourth ray planet. It has in some sense, a third ray personality, which is that mercurial brain intelligence, this here, right? But intuitively or esoterically, it is the receiving of the impressions from the soul. And this is something that was really an aha moment for me when I was studying the teachings, because when I was young, as a teenager, I was, for whatever the soul development was at that time, I did have some capacity for some intuitive thinking, and that would show up in certain kinds of abstractions that I would play with, and my bent towards a philosophical view of life. And I was always asking the deeper why. But why does that happen? But why? But why? But why? Very much a second ray orientation there. But generally speaking, when we're moving to the soul, that is the orientation towards the love principle, which is in a broader sense the soul anyway. And so always going why, and that takes you deeper and deeper into this subjective realm. And when I would be having conversations with people who would be certainly equals, if not more intellectually capable than myself, high IQs or whatever, it always, I couldn't understand how we'd get to a certain point in some kind of philosophical debate or discussion about meaning or whatever, where they would just cease to be able to contribute to the conversation, or they'd just like turn off, where as soon as I'd start going into that subjective and abstract realm, even though to me the line of logic following it intellectually was so obvious. I was like, how, okay, you're smart, why are you not picking up what I'm putting down? And of course later when I would come to the teachers, like, oh, that's what it is. It's that there's still, this person may be very intellectually capable and have really good discriminatory faculty and be able to, process information effectively. But until there is that flickering in of that intuition of the impressions of the spiritual self, of the other self, there is very much still a blindness that comes with the immersion still within the three worlds of being. So when you start asking those abstract questions, or you go deeper into the underlying principles or energies behind things, this is just not rational anymore, even if the logic is very consistent and sound. So I think it was very interesting when I started to, that's one of the great things about studying the teachings, is when you start to see these different layers, you can start to really contextualize just the degree of variance that's going on with all the different people around you, and the great challenge we have in terms of being able to understand where any person is at in their own evolution compared to us. Not that it's about comparison, but just in terms of, let's say, my younger self sort of bashing my head against the wall, trying to reason with people where there wasn't an abstract quality, and that wasn't the right question for them to be asking at that time anyway. So once you have that capacity to sort of begin to sense where this person or this person is at, then it can allow you to relate to the world in a much more efficient way, understand your own, appreciate and respect the differences between people and the level of development of consciousness. And in the best case scenario, if you're someone like, I'm a Gemini person, right? So there's a lot of that relational piece going on here. But for me, there's always been that question of, okay, how do I know to the best of my ability exactly what the problem of this person is and what is the key for them? And going into an abstract, deeply subjective, polarizing into the soul kind of answer is not going to be, the best possible gift you could give in that moment in terms of a key piece of wisdom or consciousness. Okay. In any case, I've been rambling on for a bit there anyway, but just in terms of being able to appreciate where someone is at in their particular journey of unfolding. Is someone moving from an instinctual, blind, victimized consciousness into discrimination? The bits and pieces. Do they need to immerse themselves into materiality a little bit more in terms of that Virgo aspect, if we're approaching it as Pisces Virgo, and getting a bit more skills and grounding into life and getting out of an emotional reactivity into, okay, well, what's practical and how can I improve here and here and here, and the purification that goes on in a sign like Virgo, or in getting into form or something like this, versus where is there a need to now start dropping the intellect, whereas the intellect becoming a grip over a deeper kind of intuitive capacity, which requires, at least temporarily, a suspension of the limitations of concrete perception to get into a position where you can be receptive enough to start feeling with the mind. And we've talked about this before, where it is about the head centers coming online, where you can start to feel the light pouring through the head, and this informs how you see and how you think about the world, and start to be able to eventually translate the intelligence of that light into crystallized, there's a Saturnian thing there, crystallized forms of like what actually is the purpose. Some people can actually feel the purpose before they know what it is. Like I can feel it there, but I don't know what the translation of that is yet. So that would be that building of that Antakarana there and starting to and merge. That is where that merging with the intellect and the intuition starts to happen through the Antakarana, through that Gemini process of the building of the rainbow bridge there. So that was all I wanted to touch on today, just these 3 different aspects of the development of consciousness in the most sort of simplified summation. But I want to mention too that even if you are working with the soul and you are responding to and working with the intuitive impulses, if you do have prominent instinctual placements within the chart, which aren't necessarily limitations, but just like with anything else in the chart, from the personality angle, it has to be balanced and integrated and brought into a wholeness. So in the case of Piscean placements, Cancerian placements, strong Mars, Moon, these sorts of prominent factors of the chart, you want to make sure that you're still developing and polarizing into that discriminative faculty, bringing Mercury into the picture, bringing practicality into the picture. I kind of loosely speak to this in an article I recently wrote on my Facebook and my Instagram page about Pisces, on further thoughts on Saturn in Pisces, and sort of elevating out of the negativity and the suffering of the Piscean way through both the connecting to the divine higher Pisces, but also through that Virgo practicality, the earthly aspect of the feminine, really getting into the form. So even from just a personality standpoint, making sure that you're integrating the opposite in that way. And actually, that's also true for people that are more intellectually prone. You want to make sure that you're including and integrating the instinctual energies so that they're balanced in the right way as well, because that's still a part of our human psyche and our consciousness. And if we're removed from either one, that can create a distortion and a weakness in the psyche. So it all still needs to become roundabout and integrated in that way as well. Anyway, that's all I have for today, so I'll see you in the next one. Bye.